Well, welcome to the final session here in the Cité Lumière, the final session of the evening of La Nuit des Idées, the Night of Ideas. I've been Jason Solomon. It's an absolute pleasure to be hosting you for this evening and introducing each session. Each time I think there can't be more ideas to come out, and there are. And the way that it's been programmed is so amazing. We started with Thomas Joly telling us about what would you do, he says, when he was making the opening ceremony for the Paris Olympics and the Paralympics. His presentation and his whole work was asking, what would you do? And here we are, hours later, with a session on activism, which is really asking you, what can you do? We've heard about politics, we've heard about art resistance, we've heard about the economic fallout of war and upheaval. And really this session is going to look at what can you do? What can we do about all of this? And what ideas can we come up with? I hope that's what we're going to drill down into. I've got the right session. I'm in the right place. Good. I must just add that this is going to be an absolutely fascinating session with the panel that we've got. And afterwards, you will be rewarded, ladies and gentlemen, with a free drink and some dancing and a brilliant sort of techno duo in the Mediatek. So afterwards, we're all going to go in there and enjoy the ideas and the fruits of our thoughts that we've had this evening. This final session, Activism by All Means, will be chaired by Lisa Vanhala, who is here. She's the Professor of Political Science at UCL, so yeah, behave yourselves. We have Rosalie Mann from No More Plastic. Juliette Brown is a consultant psychiatrist and activist, and she has some slides for us, so watch out. And finally, Graeme Hayes, who is a Professor of Political Sociology at Aston University. So it's a fantastic panel. You're going to hear how you can get involved. And of course, activism means you've got to be active too. There will be questions from you at the end. So for now, I'll just hand over to Lisa Vanhala for Activism by All Means. See you later.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I really love that this panel is here at the end of the evening. I think it really brings us around kind of full circle to this idea of taking action. And I've been reflecting this evening and listening to the various speakers and the panels on the relationship between ideas and discussion, which is happening here today, and action. And we might be tempted to think of them as opposites. That's what I often hear in the climate change negotiations that I go and observe for my work. Is, we need to be taking action and stop talking. But actually, I was really inspired by the playwrights that opened this wonderful evening. And I think I would challenge you to think about ideas and discussion as a form of action, just one form, and we'll hear about others today. And I also want us to think about the role of the audience that the playwrights prompted us to think about. Your very presence, your engagement here, your interaction with our panel today, these are ideas, this is action. So our goal here tonight is really to reflect on the many different approaches to activism, and perhaps a note on context. And I don't really need to sit here and lecture an audience at the Institut français about France's long tradition of collective action and protest. This is alive and well, with millions of people taking to the streets in recent years over climate justice, pension changes, and in response to recent electoral shifts. In 2017, President Macron committed to protect the right of peaceful assembly. And that's not a given looking at many places in the world anymore. The UK is no stranger to effective collective mobilization, but it's worth noting that the UK Public Order Act, adopted in 2023, has really lowered the threshold of the kinds of activities that are considered disruptive. I think this and other recent legislative changes are transforming the landscape of protest and activism. And so one of the things I want us to consider here today is about the future of activism. And let me just say a little bit about scholarly research on social movements. This offers us different lenses of analysis in terms of thinking about the activist. We can understand the activist as an individual. What motivates them? What risks are they willing to take and why? How do they understand the impact of their activism? We can understand activism through the lens of a wider social movement. The movement can be a source of solidarity and community, but it can also be a crucible for ideological differences and identity politics. There can be tensions about the objectives, the strategy, and the tactics within and across movements. And I think increasingly questions are raised about a movement's inclusivity and diversity. We can also understand activism in relation to political institutions. Some prefer insider approaches, working within the halls of power or with business actors to drive change, whereas others might feel that outsider approaches, such as civil disobedience, are most useful, or perhaps the only remaining option in raising the profile of a particularly critical or urgent issue. So I think there's really a lot for us to sink our teeth into here this evening, and I'm delighted to be joined by these three panelists to help us navigate these questions and to think a little bit about the future of activism. Let me just say a little bit more about our panelists. We've had a short introduction already, and we'll hear some short interventions from each one. We'll then turn to some discussion, and we welcome you to be a part of that conversation. Rosalie Mann is a leader in the field of sustainability. She's the founding president of the No More Plastic Foundation. She is founder of the Human Prize at the Cannes Film Festival, and she also published a book last year, No More Plastic, How Plastic Harms Our Health. Last year, Rosalie was named by Forbes as one of the 40 most influential women in France for her work. Next to Rosalie is Dr. Juliette Brown. She's a consultant psychiatrist and an activist involved with Just Stop Oil, Defend Our Juries, and Health for Extinction Rebellion, in addition to other groups. Juliette, I think it's important to note, was arrested as part of an action against JP Morgan with a number of other health professionals on the eve of the first ever level 4 heat wave in July 2022 to protest the bank's financing of fossil fuels. After the jury was unable to agree on a verdict, she is set to face trial for a second time next year in 2026 for her involvement in that action. And then we have Graeme Hayes, professor of political sociology. His teaching and research focuses on environmental protest, civil disobedience, and the criminal trials of activists involved in nonviolent direct action. His most recent books are Breaking Laws, Violence and Civil Disobedience in Protest, and La Désobéissance Civile, and he's former editor of the journals Environmental Politics and Social Movement Studies. So we'll start with Rosalie, and I'll ask you to intervene for about 5 minutes, and then we'll move along.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. I prepared some notes for me because, as you see, I had a little accident. It's a truly pleasure to be here tonight for this final panel. My sincere thanks to the French Institut for having me tonight. I'm Rosalie Mann, and I'm the founder of No More Plastic Foundation, and I don't consider myself as an activist or a militant. I'm simply someone advocating for basic human needs. That's all. But how did we reach a point where living more sustainably, free from plastic pollution, is seen as a radical? I don't think it is. Not when our health is on the front line, with rising cancer rates among people under 50, and an entire generation today of children being born pre-polluted by microplastic and nanoplastics. So let me ask you, do you believe that fighting for clean air, safe water, and healthy food in activism are just the bare minimum? For me, I have the answer. Why criminalize those who want to protect us? Why punish those who dare to see further, refuse to look away, and take action instead of deny? Because truth disturbs. Because activism exposes inaction. Because every moment, every act of civil disobedience reveals a system in collapse. At No More Plastic, we defend two fundamental truths. Plastic pollution is a public health issue. Plastic recycling is a lie. It's absolutely not a solution. It's a part of the problem. It was never a solution. Worse, it fuels the problems. Some people refuse to hear, as if they are too inconvenient to acknowledge. Activism is like putting on a pair of glasses you can never take off. Once you understand that this concerns all of us, there is no possibility to come back. Activism scares people because the activism is some exposed inaction of many. It forces us of comfort our collective failure. We stand at a turning point. On one side, scientists are raising alarms, citizens are mobilizing, entire generation are rising for a livable future. And the other, we have power structures delay, replace, delayed data in US right now. I don't know if you see that, but it's crazy. And criminalize those who dare to speak the truth, such as the Captain Paul Watson. I founded No More Plastic for one simple reason, because we can no longer afford to deny the impact of plastic. Plastic is not just an ocean issue or an environmental issue, it's a health issue, a climate issue, an economic issue. Plastic pollution driven by petrochemicals, is a crime against life itself. An invisible trait infiltrated everything, our bodies, our blood, even our brain, and all the placentas. This is the fight of our generation. And yet, when we demand accountability, when we call for solution at the scale of the crisis, when I expose the truth, that plastic recycling is not part of the solution, but part of the problem, I call it radical. I call it irresponsible. But the real irresponsibility lies with those who continue promoting this false solution, like recycling or reusing plastic. History teaches us that every great transformation begins with resistance. A future without plastic in our daily life is absolutely possible. It is not utopia. It's necessary right now. We simply need vision, the courage to stop seeing the future through the lens of the past. To those who hesitate, who fear taking a stand, remember one thing. This is not a battle for the future. This is a battle for now. And it concerns every single one of us. We are worth more. I don't see myself as an activist. I see myself as an aid of my time. I have studied plastic pollution in depth. I wrote a book that exposed its real impact on health, climate, and economy. The most important thing is to develop critical thinking, to think out of the box, and better yet, out of the plastic box. Thank you.
Juliette.
Thanks so much. Wow, thanks, Rosalie. And thank you to the Institute for the invitation. So yeah, I'm Juliette Brown. I'm a medical doctor, a consultant psychiatrist, and I look after people with severe mental illness, people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, people with severe anxiety and depression, people with dementia, learning difficulties, people with eating disorders and addictions in one of the most economically deprived, culturally diverse and environmentally polluted parts of London. And I've taken direct action many times in the last 5 or 6 years with a large group of health professionals affiliated with Extinction Rebellion, with Just Stop Oil, whose key demand is a managed end to fossil fuels, and with a group called Defend Our Juries, who are highlighting the right in this country of juries to acquit defendants according to their conscience. I'm also a member of a group called Health Workers for a Free Palestine and a supporter of Palestine Action. I've taken part in the blockade of weapons factories, in the slow marches of Just Stop Oil, which halt traffic. I've blocked the entrance to Downing Street and the Treasury after the announcement of new oil and gas licenses, and I've also damaged the offices of JP Morgan Bank on the first 40-degree day in UK history. I mention my work, my job, my profession, because it is my daily privilege to learn from my patients about health justice, or the lack of it, about what it is that makes some people in our society thrive and others' lives are thwarted. So in this country, 1 in 4 people live in poverty, 30% of our children. And in the last decade of austerity, 300,000 or more deaths were caused by that program of austerity. Meanwhile, last year, the wealth of UK billionaires increased by £35 million per day, and the richest 1% produce more climate damage than 2/3 of the rest of the globe. So I think to be effective activists, we must correctly diagnose the problem that we face. We must be alive to the reality that the structures that all of our lives are governed by, that profit the few above the rest of us, the neoliberal capitalism, it does not care about our survival. And it has co-opted and compromised our politics with a eugenicist logic. So we're in a bad place, and our leaders are missing in action. And we need effective ways to prevent greater harm. Each year, 400,000 individuals are lost to climate change, mostly through starvation and disease. 5 million people die from fossil fuel-related pollution. And 20 million people are driven from their homes or displaced around the world, thousands of them drowning off the coasts of Europe. We're on track for 4 billion deaths by 2050. That's half the world's population. In the next 25 years, that's what we and our children will be living through. So I have a patient who lost her home in the hurricane in Dominica. I have another whose family were trapped in 50-degree heat in India, and one who witnessed the flooding recently in Valencia. And in the week that I took action at JP Morgan Bank in 2022, 42 people with learning difficulties and autism died prematurely in the heat. So these aren't distant people. They are people that we're connected to. They are lives that are grievable. They're lives that matter. And pollution and heat contribute and exacerbate dementia and depression, and diabetes and pregnancy loss and stroke and epilepsy and psychosis and heart disease and asthma and cancers. So we pay the price for the pursuit of profit. And meanwhile, climate denial is rampant, and it's increasing the more visible the climate impacts are. And the more chaos and uncertainty, the more power swings to fascism and authoritarianism. Protest laws in this country have been written by the oil and gas and arms industry, and the integrity of our politicians is drowning in their donations. Since 2018, we've seen more than 8,000 arrests of peaceful protesters in this country, and extraordinarily punitive sentencing of those convicted. Scientists expect social collapse in the next 5 years. So the question I think that we should all be asking is, what's the most effective way now to prevent greater suffering? And there is a story of collective liberation that is rarely told. And it's that every one of us has benefited from progressive political struggle that is controversial and confrontational in its time. So direct action is one way to draw disparate groups together. It's visible, it's public. It illuminates, it enables, and it amplifies other methods. It still cuts through the immense efforts made in the name of capital to distract and deny our reality. Finally, let me say, I'm not here to dismiss any form of activism, but our politics has been successfully co-opted by capital. And we're subject to the same extractive abandonment, socially abandoned while simultaneously exploited for profit, that Western nations continue to enact on former colonies. So it's no longer if it ever was. enough to rely on the so-called grown-ups to save us. Quite the opposite. And that's very clear, I think, to increasing numbers of us. Thank you.
So I first heard, my name is Graeme and I'm a sociologist at Aston University, and I've been writing about and following direct action movements for over 30 years now. And for the French people in the audience, I started working on resistance to a dam built at Serre de la Phare, or which was going to be built at Serre de la Phare in the Haute-Loire near Le Puy-en-Velay, and a tunnel in the Somport Valley, which was built. And from then I've been writing about and following different sorts of direct action movements in Britain and France and Belgium and elsewhere. And I think over that 30-year period, you kind of get an insight of changing patterns of activism. And I think I just want to say a couple of things about civil disobedience and why civil disobedience now, perhaps, and how it plays out in slightly interesting ways. And you know, I listened to Juliette and I went to Juliette's trial. I was observing Juliette's trial, which is in Snaresbrook, at the Palais de Justice in Snaresbrook in June of last year. And Juliette was one of 6 healthcare professionals who'd cracked the glass at JP Morgan. And it's worth saying 2 things about this. One is worth reflecting on why JP Morgan, and thinking not just about fossil fuels, but thinking also about the entire architecture of financing, which enables fossil fuel expansion to happen. And there is a sense there, when we think about what activist tactics are, about following the money. I mean, it's a phrase that we're all very, very used to, but I think it's a really important one to think about how this system that enables the rapid expansion of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to take place. I think the other thing to mention about this trial is that, I mean, you've just heard Juliette speak, and I could hear the silence kind of spreading in the room as you were listening to her. And at that trial, Juliette and her co-defendants were able to speak for about 45 to 50 minutes to the jury each about why they'd done what they'd done, about who they are, about what their careers were, and to demonstrate their commitment, and to talk about climate as a public health issue. And I don't think it's a surprise that in that case, the jury made a decision, and that decision was not to convict them, despite the fact that they said quite clearly they had done what they had done, and that they did not have a defense in law to the charge. And again, I think that's a really important thing. And I've just come from a panel talking about science and policy, and thinking about how the courts become a place where evidence can, at least theoretically, be presented to what feels like a democratic assembly, a jury of ordinary citizens. Perhaps it's not so much a surprise that those opportunities are being rapidly shut down by both the courts and the government. So after that, two quite quick points to say. I think both from an experience of following Extinction Rebellion and some of its successor groups, Just Stop Oil, Insulate Britain, over the last 6 or 7 years. And if we go back to, with some colleagues, we sat in on the plea hearings for arrested, about 1,000, more or less, Extinction Rebellion activists who were arrested in April 2019. And during the summer of 2019, there were plea hearings. Do you plead guilty? Do you plead not guilty? And they're quite bureaucratic affairs normally, but actually in this case they weren't. And we witnessed about 150 of the activists turning up to these plea hearings and using the opportunity to talk to the court, to plead guilty actually in a large number of cases, to minor offences, disrupting the traffic, not following a Section 14 order to disperse. and talking to the court about why they'd done what they'd done. And there were two things which were very striking. And one was about a sense of having tried everything that was possible already, having recycled for years, having changed your diet, having not flown, people talking about having given up their jobs because they felt it had too much of a climate impact, women talking about not having children deliberately, because of their fears, their anxieties, the idea about what it is to come. People having faith in the democratic system, the representative democratic system, and time again and again feeling let down, feeling that there was nothing that they could do as political citizens other than to use their bodies. We had many times people saying, I have no voice. All I have is my body and what it can do. All I can do is obstruct. And so there was a very strong sense of citizenship there, allied to a very strong moral commitment, particularly to future children and grandchildren. We might come back to that, I think, a little bit if we've got time. I just wanted to pick up on a word that Juliette said and a different word that Rosalie said. Rosalie talked about truth. Juliette talked about integrity. And following Extinction Rebellion, you might remember that when Extinction Rebellion first appeared, it was in the context of the 2018 IPCC report. And one of the key messages, the key slogans of Extinction Rebellion was "Tell the truth." And at the time, I think that seemed a fairly straightforward demand, and I think it feels a little bit less so now. But that straightforward demand, I think, was to governments: tell the truth. There is science and there is policy, and one would expect policy to be evidence-led, and it isn't. We know what we know, and knowing what we know, well, why don't we have the policies that are able to address that? But I think now, what tell the truth means is somewhat complicated, and I think, given the way that the courts and the police and the governments have responded to this climate activism, I think there's a very strong sense that tell the truth now really concerns an idea of integrity, an idea of being publicly accountable. Why do you commit civil disobedience? Why do you put yourself through the stress and the trauma of being arrested, prosecuted, potentially sent to prison? And I think there is a strong sense there because you will not be moved, because you know what you know, and you need to make this publicly clear, to even if it's only within the context of a trial. To make this publicly clear, I think, is a really strong sense. And I think there's another sense, I'll just finish off, there's another sense of truth, which is the idea of prophecy, of saying what it is to come. And that seems to me to have become a very key theme, particularly of the last year, 18 months in Just Stop Oil actions, about given we know what we know, given the way the courts react, given the way that governments do not act on this, there's a very strong sense that truth isn't just about your own character, about your own unshakability. It's about saying things which are unpopular, because even though they are unpopular, they will come to pass.
Fantastic. I think that's given us a great start. So let me maybe start by putting a question to Juliette and Rosalie. I mean, you both take quite different approaches in your activism, or, whether you identify as such or not. The kind of approaches of awareness raising, speaking with government, officials, trying to persuade in that way, and the more direct action route. But both of these tactics come with inherent risks. And I just wanted to ask how you both navigate the risks that come with those particular ways of undertaking your activism. Maybe, Juliette, we can come to you first if you wanted to share.
Yeah, so as you know, I have a few images to share on the subject of risk. So this is a very good friend of mine and one of my co-defendants from the trial that Graeme was talking about, Dr. Patrick Hart. Patrick is a extremely brilliant and well-loved family doctor, a GP in Bristol. And yesterday he spent his 39th birthday in prison He was given a year prison sentence a month ago for causing £10,000 worth of damage to some petrol pumps in 2022. Patrick's seen children die of asthma in A&E departments, and he talked at this trial about, if he didn't take action, it would be like giving up on caring. So that's Patrick. And as Graeme was kind of alluding to, it was completely unheard of for peaceful protesters to be given prison time in this country a few years ago. So things have drastically changed for the worse in terms of our democratic right to protest. That's Patrick. He's also taken action with Just Stop Oil, and these guys are these are the people from Just Stop Oil who are currently in prison. Some of them are on remand for thinking about taking part in protests. So they haven't been convicted yet, but they're being imprisoned while they wait for their trials. Last year, 16 activists from Just Stop Oil were given a total of 41 years in prison for their actions. Again, entirely peaceful actions in the sense that no individual person or living being was harmed from their actions. So it's really a kind of case of shooting the messenger, I think, when it comes to climate activism and social justice activism. And then finally, just to say that on the subject, I guess, of risk, it's that these guys are some of a group called the Filton 18, who are involved in Palestine Action. And again, their actions are no more than, allegedly, than criminal damage. But these guys were arrested under terror laws, anti-terror laws. They had armed police bashing down their doors in the middle of the night, and they're still being held on remand and treated as if they were charged with terror laws, although they haven't been charged with those laws. So they're not allowed post or contact with visitors. So that's the Filton 18. If you want to have a look at look them up. So this kind of activity, there's huge risks. These guys are at the kind of cutting edge, but 8,000 other arrests and thousands of other people involved in protest. Huge financial, emotional, legal, professional risks. But what's really interesting to me, and I think you were kind of alluding to it as well, is that people are not deterred. There are more and more people coming forward. There are more people willing to take action all the time because the problem is still there. 4 billion people dying in the next 25 years. While that problem is still there will be people who want to take action against climate betrayal, which is really what we're talking about. Thanks.
So me, it's not the same. I'm not in prison, and I don't have the same risk, etc. But I know that my name is on the list of the petrochemical industry, etc. Because plastic is coming from fuel. So, but I just would like to explain you one thing, because why I started No More Plastic. I started No More Plastic because my son was really sick, and one night during at the hospital, the doctor said me one sentence that I never forget. It's normal, it's pollution. And for me, this sentence, it was like an electroshock. I don't understand how we could continue to live in the life on the planet who tolerate that the children can be sick because we're living in denial. For me, it's impossible. So even if there is risks or I I have my name on the list, etc. I receive harassment in internet, in social media, etc. It doesn't care. I never stop to explain to people that recycling plastic is a lie. Recycling plastic is absolutely not a solution. When you heard economic circular of plastic economic circular that everybody talk about, etc., etc., it's not true. It's worse. Why is it worse? It's worse because plastic is toxic, and when you're recycling something toxic, it's still poison. So it's just recycling poison. You see what I mean? And every children is sick right now with cancer, infertility, obesity, cardiovascular disease. We have the proof of all of that. We have the proof by the scientists, with the science, etc. It is the reason why I wrote this book that I wrote, because I would like to give all this information to everyone. It's not a religion. Check, have on your find the rest on the internet, etc. All of this is accessible on internet. All of studies is accessible, so it's not a secret. So right now, I never stop to talk. I never stop to fight against this industry. It's a huge industry. It's billion and billion of dollars because it's lots of money, but it doesn't care. There is too important. It's a public health issue right now. Thank you.
So I think I would like to bring the audience in. This is the time for taking action. So if you have any questions, I think we have a roving mic somewhere. So maybe we can start with, sorry, I can't see very well, but the person on the aisle there on my right, and then the one on the left towards the back. We'll take maybe 2 questions at a time. I ask that you keep it concise so that we can try and get as many questions as we can and hear from our panelists again.
It is on. Now it's on. Fabulous. Thank you. This is a question for you, Juliette, and thank you for such an informed and interesting panel. Deliberately charging under terror laws for more punitive sentences and dishing out long custodial sentences to people who haven't offended before, for example, and the new protest laws with a lower threshold. I'm with you that all of these things are very problematic, but I wonder whether you're of the opinion that peaceful protest, obviously in the sense that no violence being inflicted, but peaceful protest that nonetheless causes criminal damage, playing devil's advocate, I'm a lawyer, so it's my job, should that be without punishment at all? Are you of that opinion?
Great. Okay, and then we had a question at the back there, and then maybe we'll come, there's one a little bit towards the front, but we'll go to the back first there.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. I was part of, I used to work in Just Stop Oil as well. One of my main problems was that in the last mass mobilization campaign, we had 500 people mobilized, getting arrested sometimes several times. But we were aiming for actually 10 times to 20 times more people. I think there are a few planets that are aligned for a campaign that could reach such numbers. But I think for that to happen, we would need to bring people from climate campaigns towards the decolonial campaigns, such as the Palestine campaigns. I think Just Stop Oil did that because there was a split from Just Stop Oil, with Just Stop Oil students becoming Youth Demand, which is a group that's doing Palestine and climate stuff. I would remind everyone that the US military emits more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than entire countries such as Denmark and Portugal. So I'd like to ask you, we also have Greta Thunberg that said today, you can't be a climate activist supporting what's happening without supporting the Palestine cause. So my question to you would be, how can we design a campaign that would actually reach more numbers, that would, make us reach those 5K people on the streets, taking action, getting arrested, completely blocking Westminster, or even 10,000 people? And that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take one more from the woman in the middle there.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I am Gloria, and I am the founder of Youth for Inclusive Europe. So we are a civic organization working with young people here in the UK and also mainland Europe to advocate and research for more inclusive policies within the European Union. My background is in mental health, so also part of the NHS, and my question is more about that. So it's for Juliette and Rosalie. So when we talk about activism, I feel like we also have to mention that it's not all beauty. It's not all, like we are going to fight, we're going to have the solution. It's not like that. So my question is, in terms of your mental health, do you have boundaries? For instance, when you are outside of, let's say, no more plastic kind of meetings, do you have boundaries between your personal life and your no more plastic meetings, etc.? And what about stopping? Have you ever thought of stopping what you are doing because of your mental health?
Fantastic range of questions. So we have one devil's advocate question about punishment, appropriate punishment, a question about strategy, and a question, I think, about self-care, possibly in terms of, this is where operating under a crisis scenario, the urgency of this can really take a toll. So how do you take care of yourselves? So maybe Juliette, I'll come to you first, and then Rosalie, and then we'll give Graeme the last word there.
So if I just take the first question, people who take part in activism are not evading responsibility. We do what we do to highlight a problem that isn't being addressed. So I think there's no expectation that there's no punishment. But there has been a very important tradition in this country. Of course, we didn't invent activism in the last 5 years after the 2018 IPCC report. Activism has always been with us. But there has been an important tradition of respecting acts of conscience within the law and giving leeway to people acting under their conscience to try and prevent harm. And of course, ideally, if governments were acting in the ways that we expect them to protect us and prevent harm, then none of us would need to be sitting here tonight and having this discussion. I think, if there's one thing that I've learnt in my life and observing the communities that I work in, it's that power doesn't operate on our behalf, unfortunately. We need to put pressure on them to take the right action. Even we're talking about even today, Keir Starmer's suggesting he might approve the Rosebank oil field, which is a complete death sentence for the future. We need to keep putting pressure on people, but we take responsibility for our actions within that. It has been very clear in recent years that there has been political pressure on the judiciary to make to put limits to protest, both through law, through the way that cases are handled, with some defendants being denied the right to talk about their motivations, juries not being allowed to hear the truth of what drove those activists to do what they do, and also changes to the way that convictions are treated in terms of sentencing. So there's all of that going on.
For me, so sometimes it's difficult to continue to fight, etc. honestly, I have a very strong family and really great support, and I have a wonderful team and lots of ambassadors all around the world who use their community to explain and raise awareness about all the scientist studies that we will have. So with all of this kind of support, I can continue and don't depress myself, etc. But sometimes it's difficult, of sure. I like to compare the plastic pollution with the tobacco, because I don't know if you know it, but in the past, doctor recommended tobacco for the health. It could be good for us, etc. Like the plastic is recommended right now for medicine, packaging, textile, etc., etc. Because it's exactly the same thing. And when I receive lots of message from people working in the petrol industry, in the plastic industry, or in the plastic waste management, etc. And when I receive the message, the direct message, they told me it's wonderful what we made, but they can't because it's still working in this kind of industry. For me, it's like a win, because this kind of little people who understand, who begin to understand that it's the wrong way to take. It's exactly the same thing when doctors realized that they recommended tobacco to their patient, because it was that. And I think so the king was dead, no? Because doctors recommended to smoke, no? The father of Elizabeth. I think so, yes. So you see, it's not very far from us. So I like to compare this, because for me it's exactly the same thing. Today, lots of people recommended plastic recycling, etc., but it doesn't know what exactly this material and what the impact in the future. So for me, it's so important to continue to fight, to continue to raise awareness, to continue to give all the information access to everyone and explaining again and again. It's so important. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I wouldn't mind just really quickly coming back to the first question. And I think it's when people act with integrity, I think that both the trial and the sentencing should reflect that action, should reflect that integrity. So to give an example, I also observed the trial of the Colston 4 in Bristol in December 2020, January 2021. These were 4 activists who were charged with criminal damage for pulling down the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston in Bristol. In the course of that trial, the defendants were able to explain why they'd done what they'd done to a jury. They were able to invite expert witnesses to take the stand. So David Olusoga talked for a day to the jury, to the court, about the slave trade in Bristol. And they had a defense in law. And that defense in law were their Article 10 and Article 11 rights under the European Convention of Human Rights, which protected their freedom of assembly and their freedom of expression. And it was the role of the jury to decide whether the action they had taken was justified and proportionate. The jury decided that it was and found them not guilty. That seems to me to be that the legal scholar Anthony Duff talks about the importance of defendants being able to explain their action in terms which make sense to themselves. And I think that's a really valuable thing. If we're serious about juries as being places where democracy happens, because ordinary people are selected at random in order to decide what is right and good for the community, then it seems to me that we should be allowing defendants to explain why they've done what they've done. And sentences should also reflect the fact that the people who are acting are not doing this to take away from the community, but are doing this in order to protect the community.
So I think we could probably sit here until 5 in the morning and discuss these things, as was alluded to in the beginning, but I'm afraid that's all we have time for. So please join me in thanking our fantastic, very thought-provoking panelists this evening.